And we are off.
Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. We're back with the 67th. Geez, that was my year I graduated college. 67th Zoom call with Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Zoom. We have close to 50 people on the call, and we are at Progressive Radio Network as well at my Solartopia Green Power and Wellness slot. It is a great and honor to have everybody with us. We have a full agenda as always. We're going to go to 6:40 Eastern time. We are going to cut it off there. We will not have a schmooze session afterwards today. And also next week is Indigenous Peoples Day. And we're going to take that day off so that everybody can go out and demonstrate with your local tribes and nations and Indigenous activists. So we will reconvene 2 weeks from today. I guess on October 18th at 5 p.m. as usual. And in that two weeks from today, we're going to have a full focus on something that everybody needs to study up and learn thoroughly, which is Steve Bannon's plan to turn the United States into a fascist dictatorship. There's a lot of coverage of this at Raw Story, but Steve Bannon has been Trump's Rasputin, basically. He is a very smart guy. He has a deep understanding of the flaws of the American constitutional system. And he has what I consider to be an extremely credible plan for completely turning American democracy into dust and turning this country into a tangible fascist dictatorship. Mike Hirsch has posted the links to the latest piece. The best coverage of Steve Bannon has been at Raw Story, but he is to be taken very, very seriously. As a historian, I am terrified by his grasp of how this American system could be overturned. He is the brains behind the January 6th uprising, and they, believe me, they came within an hour of taking over this country. And if they'd gotten there an hour earlier and got their hands on Mike Pence and Nancy Pelosi and a few others, Donald Trump would be in the White House and most of us would be at Guantanamo. So, it's easy to sound like hyperbole, but the fact is that if you really look at what Steve Bannon is trying to do here, it's totally credible and totally doable. So 2 weeks from today, October 18th, we will discuss in great detail the full potential for a constitutional coup d'etat in this country, beginning in 22 and culminating in 24. So please take a look at what's in the chat there. And it is a nightmare, and it is a credible nightmare. And we will go into deep detail on that in 2 weeks. As I say, next week is Indigenous Peoples Day. We want to respect that. People go out, march, do what you got to do. And today we will end it promptly at 6:40. So that last week we went on. We went on for 3 hours, and it was fantastic. By the way, we talked about the COVID and how to deal with it and so on. So I want to thank Mike Hirsch for being our engineer today. We have Joel Segal, my co-conspirator, on the line. We're going to cover. We're going to start today with women in the Middle East, just for a change of pace. We have the great LYNNE FEINERMAN with us, and as far as I'm concerned, you can talk about the violence in the Middle East and everywhere else in the world. In the Middle East is who's at fault, the Palestinians or the Israelis. Elsewhere it's whoever else. But you got to remember that 99% of the violence in this world is caused by men. And if you're looking at a root of the violence in the world, it is men. And so we need to deal with, starting in the Middle East, I think, there was a great play, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Lysistrata, that came out of Athens and had a solution where women won the piece, and we'll have LYNNE introduce us to that. Then we're going to talk, I'll cover this real quick. We had a big discussion last week on Arizona, and we'll come back to it. The New York Times has run an editorial, an article actually, confirming everything we said about Arizona, that Then we're going to, the great Joel Segal is going to discuss with us what's really involved with these, this big argument over $1 trillion versus $3.5 trillion. What's in the middle there? What are the policies that we're going to lose and the programs we're going to lose if we get down to 1 trillion as opposed to 3.5? It's all very abstract in the media, but in fact, it's very tangible. I also want to discuss, everybody's yelling at Manchin and Sinema. Why are the Republicans getting a free pass on this? Why is half the US Senate a bunch of zombie lobotomized drones who are completely not held accountable for anything? Do we now have a US Senate that's only got 50 members and we write off the other 50? Also want to talk about the new Progressive Action Coalition and the new Smart Aleck. So we've got a full agenda here. Hopefully we'll get done by, well, we will get done by 6:40. We'll get it all in there, and it's a joy to have you all with us. So let's start in the Middle East. Let's start with the root cause of all the problems in the world, which is testosterone. And Lynn FEINERMAN, if you'll tell us what your group is doing to make Middle East peace, I would be thrilled.
Thank you so much, Harvey. First of all, I just want to thank Harvey and Joel because I actually think that my inspiration to find the group I'm working with came from them, because Harvey in particular brought up his wonderful Lysistrata alternative. And
we have to explain it.
Oh, right.
So the idea, let me do it real quick and then I'll turn it back to you, okay, Lynn? The idea is you have a referendum, a parallel referendum, one in Palestine with the Palestinian people, one with the Israelis, but only women vote. And they vote for 7 women each side. 14 women go into a room. They have mediators or whatever, and they sit there until they come up with a solution. They come out of the room with the solution to the Middle East crisis. And if any man refuses to go along, women all over the world refuse intimate relations with men until the peace plan is adopted. Is that a fair representation, Lynn?
It's a fair representation of your idea.
Yes, okay. You have a lot of cold showers if that happens. So,
so what happened was then I joined, I think through information I got from Joel, I joined a group that's called the Israeli-Palestinian Peace Symposium series. And they had already done 2 symposia when I joined. And I looked at them and I felt that we needed to be more goal-oriented and that we really needed more women. Most of the people on those 2 symposia panels were men. So there was one other woman in a group of about 10 on this in this group that's running these symposia. Her name is FATIMA ARGUN. I hope that she has joined us. And,
yes, she has. She's with us.
Yay. Hello, FATIMA. And FATIMA and I got together and we decided that we were going to do our own women's perspective symposia. The first was held September 14th. And it was just, the women on the panel were extraordinary. I've already put the link to the symposium, to that symposium on the chat, and I will put it on again. Just so that you know what drew me to this to begin with, Middle East peace has been a concern of mine for quite a long time. I went to the Middle East and lived there for 2 years to create a movie called If You Make It Possible about Palestinian and Israeli peacemakers. And after that, I directed a group called the Hebron Community Project. We worked with peacemakers both in Israel and Palestine to teach nonviolent communication and other peace building techniques to citizens of Palestine who were very enthusiastic, and settlers from Avraham Avinu, Beit Hadassah, from Kiryat Arba, some of the settlements there. And they were very difficult to deal with. They were willing to look at it from the point of view of working with their own group, with their own people only, not with Palestinians. And the interesting thing about that was that the reason was that they were having a lot of trouble in their schools with violence between the teachers and the students.
Oh.
And so what really they cared about was the violence that was coming from them was coming home to roost, in the immortal words of Malcolm X. And so that's sort of a little bit of background. Since then, I have, been much concerned about it, but I haven't been all that active. This is my sort of re-entry into activism. I hope that you all will take a look at this incredible set of women. There were 3 who actually managed to get on. One, Gabi Lasky, a member of Knesset, her technology was not working. So, but the 3 others are incredible. Fida Nara Taboni is wonderful. Robbie Damelin is one of the leaders of the Parents Circle. She lost a son in the conflict. And Nafisa Badarin is just amazing. She is a person who's a practitioner of Reiki for peace, and she lives in Palestine, the Palestinian area of the old city. And so we are about doing three different symposia. The first is the reality on the ground, which is the one you're going to view if you get the link. The second is, how do we get an agreement? What do we want in it? What are the most important elements for an agreement? And the third is, how do we get there? What is the on the ground action that we need to take? Now, these are not meant to be, definitive and exclusive or anything kind of symposia. They are introducing the 3 concepts. And after we showed, I'm not saying we caused this, but it's interesting that right after we showed this, we showed it on the 14th of September, on the 22nd of September, there was a huge group of women who held hands and surrounded the entire old city. Wow. In Jerusalem. So, there's some kind of synchronicity. I don't know what the cause and effect is.
How many women were there? That's a big.
Yeah, and note that we never hear about this stuff in the media. There are so many things going on, so many initiatives for peace going on right now in Israel and Palestine, and the media are just deaf and dumb to it. And it is really important that we bring that out and begin to get these things around and publicize them and make known our concern. And I would like to introduce my colleague, Fatima Argun, and hopefully she can add anything that I've forgotten to say to you.
Well, thank you for that. And we'll be brief, and but Fatima, we definitely want to hear from you. I think most of us agree that if we can find a solution to peace in the Middle East, maybe the human race has a chance. So just give us a brief word and we'll continue with Lynn. Thank you so much for that. Much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. That was, I think that pretty much summarized everything. I really don't have too much to add to it. Always going back to the Lysistrata reference, of course, but, I think we did a pretty good job in sort of summarizing what was going on the ground. And that was the purpose of the first symposium, was to get a sense of where things were.
Okay.
What is it about the present situation that we as the audience can take away from what the presenters have, given us? And that, of course, takes us to the second part of the second module of the whole thing, which is, okay, where do we take this? What do we want in an agreement? Now, it's not necessarily a logical conclusion that we would go to an agreement. It's one possibility, But I think it's an important one to consider, and I think it's probably the most viable one at this time. I would definitely like to hear other perspectives on this. Sorry,
okay. Well, when will your next symposium be? Because we got to move on. But when is the next one?
Okay,
put
sorry.
the link in?
The next one, we are not planning it until January because we want to take our time and do it properly.
All right, good. Is there a website people can go to join the dialogue on this? Lynn, you're shaking your head.
Yes, there's a Facebook page, but I put the link to the symposium on the chat today, your chat twice.
Okay.
So go there and look at the symposium. That's the most important, but Joel can also tell you how to get in touch with us better because he is one of the founders of this group.
Okay, Joel, thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you, Fatima, and let's hope that this moves ahead. Joel, can you tell us real quickly where people can go to this Middle East dialogue, and then we're going to move on back to the U.S. But a very important piece, and thank you so much, both of you.
Well, I want to thank you for bringing Lynn on.
Yes,
because we found Lynn through this forum, and Lynn and Fatima, they just did this phenomenal, one of the best symposiums I've ever seen. But just what we're trying to do is get those folks who are already working on Israel-Palestine, who are there and here, to get to know each other and re-energize this movement, because our theory of change is that we in the grassroots have to be leaders. We have to be leaders because you can't expect the elected officials, certainly in Israel, to do anything. And you got Thomas Poga, who everyone should know, who's from a very prestigious Ivy League university, who's working on Middle East peace as well. And I think we need to hook up with Thomas because we could also hold some symposiums at his university. I'm not going to mention it right now. We'll let Thomas do that at some point in time. But at the end of the day, in conclusion, if you look at what happened in Northern Ireland, that conflict ended when women began to march in Belfast and Northern Ireland, Protestant and Catholic women calling for an end to the conflict. And that's sort of the model we're working at here. But we want to influence Biden to not be fearful, and the Congress that's stifled by AIPAC, to bring both parties to the conflict to the table. And Lynn, the other thing that happened shortly after our last symposium, we're not taking credit for this, but it is somewhat coincidental because some of our leaders who've been part of the symposium were involved in this very significant project that the press hasn't told you about, and that's top level former senior Knesset officials met with current PLO and Palestinian Authority officials to talk about peace talks, coexistence, and a plan. And one of our top Palestinian leaders sort of spearhead that. So don't ever believe when people say you can't make a difference, because we're showing that you just got to get started. But Lynn and Fatima are important, but more importantly, if you want to get to know what we're doing, you can email me directly at joel.r, or I'll put it in the chat, .siegel@gmail.com, and then I'll send you the the website. But we need everyone in this group to participate, right, Lynn and Fatima? At the next symposium, we need everyone to participate.
Right, and so
they're phenomenal.
If ever there was a conflict that appeared to be unsolvable, it was Northern Ireland, and it wasn't until the women came out and marched that there was finally a solution. So let's hope. And Thomas, if you're in touch with Lynn and Fatima and Joel, it would be really great. And we'll continue to push everybody participating. So don't be shy. Do email Joel. He does email back. Okay. All right. Wonderful. That's really an honor to have you both with us. We will continue on this thread, and let's put like within a year to have the Middle East crisis solved, so we can move on to the next major flashpoint. Thank you both. Thank you all three so much. And Thomas, I hope you join in as well. And we'll put all the connections in the chat. We'll talk about this again in 2 weeks when we reconvene. Okay, I want to mention one thing. Thank you again. I want to mention one thing. Last week, we had an hour-long discussion with the three great heroes of the Arizona nightmare, Ray Lutz, who's on the call today, John Brakey and Steve Rosenfeld. And, we're often on the left accused of hyperbole and making things up, but the New York Times has just come out with a piece that completely confirms everything we said about the role of outsiders and, well, I don't know if you guys are outsiders, but the role of sane people in Arizona to shoot down this nightmare fake recount / audit that came from the ninja nonsense. And the Times, I don't have I think I may have emailed you, Mike, if you have it, the link to the Times article about Arizona, but it basically confirmed everything we said. And I think we should, certainly the progressive activist community can take responsibility for shooting down this clear conspiracy from the Trump people to delegitimize the vote in Arizona and the reality that they're going to try and do this in other states. And we discussed the need to do a handbook, which Ray, you will be a part of, obviously, a principle on how we stare down this wave of fake recounts and audits that's going to be coming at us as the Trump Bannon nightmare tries to delegitimize American democracy. Myla, did you want to jump in on that?
I just have a question. I'm hoping that the New York Times article gave credit to Ray Lutz and John Brakey and Steve Rosenfeld.
That's too much to ask. They will never credit grassroots activists. I mean, when the New York Times credits grassroots activists, you will know that the Messiah has come. I mean, they just won't do it. But what can I tell you? They do. They credit all the work, the good work that was done. They will never go beyond the Democratic Party to credit people at the grassroots. But that's that. But they did credit the work, and so you can Google New York Times and Arizona election and see what they say. Art Levine, I see you wearing your Michael Jackson T-shirt there.
Yeah.
Are you going to moon dance for us?
I just want to know, is the article you're referring to the one that is headline Arizona Vote Review made up the numbers election experts say?
Yes.
It's written by Michael Wines and Nick Corsanti. In the article itself, it indirectly or without naming people, it directly praises local people for calling it out. I don't understand.
It just basically, well, read the article. Just basically confirms everything you said about the nonsense recount was true. They're not going to. The New York Times. The policy of the New York Times is to never credit grassroots activists who are outside the Democratic Party. So, but it does confirm everything we said that Ray and John and Steve said was going on in the Arizona recount.
Yeah, true, except that there was massive internal debate on Lutz's election integrity board where lots of people were critical of Brakey and to some degree Lutz over giving the imprimatur of credibility to it by working with their Republican liaison. So it's not that simple a story. I'm saying that there was a lot, you're eliding. There was a lot of internal division among progressives about exactly what the role of Lutz and Brakey were. And obviously there was a lot of arguments on this forum and this Zoom call and also in that listserv about whether by appearing as quote assistants or in press conferences or working as assistants or liaisons with the Republican guy who was working with the cyber ninjas, they were giving it unfortunate credibility. I'm just.
I as you might guess, completely disagree with that. I mean, your analysis of what went on is correct, but what, as far as I'm concerned, what Ray and John and Steve did there was absolutely essential, and the whole thing would never.
I agree. Steve's reporting was great. I'm just saying there's an area of disagreement among progressives over their role. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Harvey.
If there weren't a disagreement among progressives, they wouldn't be progressives. So
Harvey.
Two progressives three opinions. Ruth, go ahead, and then we're gonna.
Yeah, I just
move on.
wanted to say, I totally agree with you that I disagree with what Art's saying or progressives. They would, okay, they would have never, Lutz and Brakey would have never been able to get in there and observe had they not worked with those people. It's just axiomatic.
Right,
Okay.
and we're not disagreeing with Art. He's characterizing
Okay.
what actually
Well, I
happened.
mean, okay, I meant, I'm
No, it's-
sorry, I didn't mean that, but
No,
but
you're
the
100%
bottom,
right. You're 100% right. And John Brakey, in particular, being an Arizonan, is that what he call them? Arizonians? I mean, he lives in Arizona, and he was integrated. He knew Bennett and the whole crew there. It really speaks well for local organizing. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's quite amazing that this all came down in Arizona, where we were so well ensconced. You know, in Ohio 2004, if Bob Fitrakis hadn't been in Columbus with the Columbus Free Press and had a website and knew Bob knew the whole machinery inside and out as a political science professor. If he hadn't been there like John was in Arizona, we wouldn't have known anything about what happened in Ohio 2004. So, you know, this really speaks to being on the scene and being integrated. And Ruth, you're right, and Art, you're right too. There, you know, the progressive community was in its usual uproar. But what we confirmed is that having John, Steve, and Ray there made all the difference in the world. I mean, we might now be discussing, you know, trumpeting the ninja analysis when instead it turned into total garbage, very clear, and even the New York Times got it at this point. So, right, Ruth, you're 100% right, and Art, you're 100% right too. I mean, it's really a lesson for the future, as far as I'm concerned. Anybody else want to comment on that before we move on? George Ripley. George, you gotta remember, it's the bane of these calls. You gotta remember to unmute. Go ahead. Go ahead, George. Still can't hear you, George.
I know. Here we go.
There.
I just want to remind people of the controversy with regards to Jill Stein when she raised $8 million in 2 weeks to do the audit of 3 states back, what, 6
No, it was
years ago?
2016. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, there was a big fight within the Green Party leadership over the best thing the Green Party's ever done was promote those audits, I thought.
Well, it was a great thing. There's no doubt about it. And thank God she was able to raise $8 million. And God knows we're going to need it going forward. And once again, of course, the Democratic Party completely dropped the ball in 2016. For those of you who may not remember, Jill Stein, the presidential candidate preceding Howie Hawkins in 2016, clearly understood, again, Bob Fitrakis was at the core of this, that the irregularities in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida had turned the election. And she went into, Bob was the attorney, went into Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That's all we had the resources for, even with $8 million. And won a court decision in Michigan demanding a recount that would have been credible. And and Hillary Clinton had the possibility of signing off to have this recount in Michigan, which would have turned the state of Michigan, and she refused to sign off. But there we go. So again, on the ground is on the ground. Ray Lutz, you want to jump in here real quick?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say that we have been working on our own review of the Cyber Ninja report. We agree with the idea that the count of ballots themselves is just way off. They only had one ballot that they provided, that the counts of, not the vote counts, just the counts of the paper. And on this ballot, there were about 48,000 supposedly pieces of paper, and the Cyber Ninjas only counted 32,000 of them. So they're off by 15,000 ballot sheets. That's by their own numbers. Okay, so they're off by 15,000. And then we confirmed that by looking at the cast vote record. So it's such an utter mess that I can't, no one can believe that they came out with numbers that were really close. So we have to get to these original tally sheets to find out how bad it really was. Make sure that everybody knows that the Cyber Ninjas effort was just basically a hoax. I mean, they were people who didn't know what they were doing. They came out with, just numbers that were just made up. I mean, we'll be able to find out by getting those tally sheets, but they have not provided those. We wanted those from the very beginning. And so we're putting the pressure on now. You have to realize that we had to kind of wait for them to get done and see what they're going to come out with before we could actually engage our full, our ammunition and our guns attack on this. But we will be, and we're going to be looking into it. It's a great thing to get the information, having a hand count that somebody did. We're going to be able to compare every single batch that they hand counted to every single batch in the cast vote record and see which ones they missed and so forth. And
right now, and then the point of bringing up the Times article, and Art has reminded us of the discussion, is that it's pretty clear to me that if you guys hadn't been on the ground there, none of this would be being discussed. So thank you again. And we've got to make sure that as this nonsense proceeds to other states with other recounts, that we know that we have people like you and we know what we're doing. So thank you.
We can cut it off at the knees with a good review of this and make sure people know what happened here, and not just have to go look.
You and John and Steve are going to have to do a guidebook.
By the way, there's going to be a House hearing on this coming Thursday. Jeremy Raskin and others in that committee, and we may be in that hearing.
Good. All right, we'll watch for that. Absolutely. Jeffrey, and then we're going to move on. We're going to go to Joel Segal and talk about the big bills now and what's really confronting us. Jeffrey, did you have something you wanted to throw in before we move on here?
Yeah, so it's been bugging me for a while. I remember before the meeting started, someone mentioned an anti-nuclear Zoom meeting.
That's tomorrow. Yes, Anna Georgie was going to post that link in the chat if she hasn't already. Okay, so look for the link from Anna Georgie.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, now in front of the country now is the big debate over a $1 trillion bailout or infrastructure bill from Biden and the $3.5 billion that contains more progressive stuff. Everybody's yelling at the progressives. They're yelling at Joe Manchin. They're yelling at Kristen Sinema. There's, by the way, if anybody wants to get a little bit of a grip on who Kristen Sinema really is, Maureen Dowd, who appears to be a kindred spirit of hers, has a piece in the Times about the mindset of Kristen Sinema. And I think people have to understand she is not a normal politician. She's a very, she is her own person. And how she wound up in the U.S. Senate is beyond me, but there she is. And we just need to deal with who she is. But what really, really gets me about this debate between over the progressive pieces of the puzzle and all that stuff is that the 50 Republicans are not being challenged. I mean, you've got this block, this procession of zombies who are 100% against everything that the Democrats propose. This is not normal in U.S. history. This has not happened before. This did not happen in Watergate or even in our wars. There were Republicans who you can actually talk to. And what we now have is Mitch McConnell, who is way more evil, as far as I'm concerned, than Donald Trump. And this is nonpartisan, but I'm a historian, but much more damage has been done to the country, certainly since he got out of the White House, by Mitch McConnell than by Donald Trump. And you have 50 Republicans on this side of the aisle who are going completely unchallenged. It's all about Manchin and Sinema, which is ridiculous. Do we assume now that the 50 Republicans are carved in stone and are not expected to consider any of this legislation? So that is the question of the day. And the media has to be cracked on this because there's a guy from Ohio. There's a guy from, there's a woman from Iowa. There's Republican senators, 50 of them from all over the country. and they're not being challenged about any of this stuff. So what I've asked Joel Segal, my co-conspirator here, to discuss with us the role of the progressives in this, and specifically, what are the actual programs that are at stake in between the $1 trillion program and the $3.5 trillion program, and how we need to deal with this. Joel has got all these years in Congress, and if there's anybody expert on this situation, it's him. So Joel, if you'll take it away, please.
Thank you for those kind words, Sluggo. Well, first of all, one announcement is James Clyburn on MSNBC this morning announced that after infrastructure is voted on, they're going to vote on voting rights.
Wow.
Yeah, no, this is big and very important. What they're going to do, they're going to synthesize the both bills, HR 1 and HR 4, into one bill. So the For the People Act and the John Lewis bill will be put into probably one bill, because that's the only way that you're going to pass these bills. The one thing that really surprised me is one of the ideas that I had about reconciliation, which was kind of shot down by most everyone I've ever talked to. It looks like they're probably going to use reconciliation, and which would be a creative thing to do if you're a lawmaker. You just got to put a number on the bill, and you can't do more than 3 reconciliation bills, but they're either going to try to do a special carve out for the filibuster or reconciliation. So that's great news, right? There was a lot of pressure placed on Biden on voter suppression, and especially the African-American groups were saying, you're not really focusing on that. But back to the infrastructure bill, just a little.
Joel, very quickly, make sure everybody understands what reconciliation is. Just briefly, if you can tell what that procedure is and how it impacts this legislation.
Reconciliation just means that you can bypass the filibuster, which means 60 votes to pass a bill, which means you'd have to get basically 9 Republicans, which Democrats aren't going to get. And by having a number affixed to the bill, so that's, it's just a rule of the Senate. So if you have a funding that's affixed to the bill, you can pass it through reconciliation, but ultimately we've got to eliminate the filibuster, or the minority will always control the majority. If you look at both bills, the hard infrastructure bill is the most progressive bill I've ever seen since Obama's American Jobs Act, which went nowhere because the Republicans basically killed it. But you're talking about completely modernizing roads, bridges, water systems, transit systems, putting thousands of electric charging stations. So that bill, everyone thought that'll be passed no problem. Think again. Now, under McConnell's leadership, he's telling the Republicans not to vote on the bipartisan bill, which is that's something the press hasn't really honed in on. Now that's very serious, because people thought, the hard infrastructure bill, no problem. No, it's going to be a problem too, even to pass that one. The hardest problem will be the soft infrastructure. The key components of that, it's an amazing bill. It actually resembles, what Bernie Sanders ran on, which would be 2 years of free community college, paid family leave, which is what Europe and most of the industrialized world has had for a long, long time. So if there's an illness or woman has a baby, instead of having to pay for that yourself, it would be paid family leave, universal access to pre-kindergarten. With childcare, you would pay no more than 7% of your income. Now, I don't know if that makes it universal, but the average cost of childcare is insanely expensive, $800, $900, sometimes $1,000 a month. So a lot of people will not go back to work right now because they can't afford the childcare. And of course, the Republicans say it's because, they're lazy and they got free money. That's not what's happening. It's hard to find, childcare. So
let me interject. As historian on call, this will take 30 seconds. There was a bill passed by the Congress in the 1970s to provide national childcare at a very low cost. Just like any other part of the public school system, childcare would have been provided by the federal government as it was during World War II. And the bill passed both houses of Congress and at the urging of Pat Buchanan was vetoed by Richard Nixon. And the reason that we do not have national childcare in this country today is because Richard Nixon vetoed it in the early 1970s. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Joel.
No, I didn't know that. I appreciate you, the edification, Professor. One of the main reasons why we don't have universal childcare is because the progressive movement has been woefully inadequate at trying to get it passed. There just really has never been a serious attempt, in my opinion. I didn't see it. And there were a lot of conferences on childcare, but I never saw, when I was in Congress, I didn't see any legislation that was serious to get it passed. Now we're really looking at a possible breakthrough. Now, everything that I mentioned, which is social legislation seen as so-called progressive, is exactly what Manchin and Sinema would probably want to take out, especially the 2 years of community college. The other big issue is, do you extend the child tax credit? Because there's a sunset on the child tax credit. It's going to last for a few more months. The progressives want to extend it. The moderates don't want to expand it. Here were the two problems. Sinema was saying this costs too much. It's gonna, it's fiscally irresponsible. But incidentally, the bill is paid for by closing corporate loopholes, offshore loopholes, enforcing laws to get taxes, from the rich that they always fail to pay through different, machinations. But the 28% corporate tax rate, I think that's what's freaking out Sinema and Manchin. And incidentally, the last several weeks, they have both been to very high dollar fundraisers. One that Manchin went to was with the fossil fuel industrial complex. I'm sure that really surprises people like Tatanka Bricka, who's working on the Green New Deal in California. So Manchin is saying the soft infrastructure bill can be no more than 1.5 trillion. The progressives are saying, no, it's got to be at least 2 trillion. Because in order for them to get reelected, progressives, they ran on, a Biden Build Back Better plan. So they got to get reelected also. With Sinema hasn't even mentioned really, what she wants to take out. So the negotiations over the next several weeks will be what is taken out and what will be left in, what the National Coalition for the Homeless is going to do, and many other organizations. They'll be writing letters to Manchin, Sinema, Pelosi, and Schumer, calling for example, there's a lot of money. One of the largest increases that I've ever seen for the production of affordable housing. What's going to be on the chopping block first will be a dramatic expansion in affordable housing, retrofitting it so it's more energy efficient. That's what they're probably going to, cut first. Lastly, I'd say in conclusion, whenever you hear the price tag, 3.5 trillion, that's over 10 years. That's not what the right wing will do, including Democrats, the corporate Democrats, is say, you can't spend all this money. We don't have the money. That's a lie. It's very, very affordable. We spend $780 billion a year on the military, and we're not even in a war. We're looking at $400 billion a year. So it's very affordable. It's just that I think Sinema and Manchin are freaking out over the fact that they may have to tax some of their biggest donors. And what Harvey said about the Republicans is very true. When I watch the news shows, they smash the progressives and say, it's your fault, you're the obstructionist. No one ever talks about that the Republicans, they haven't had an infrastructure plan, in years. That Trump kept talking about infrastructure plan. I never saw one get passed. There will be 2 bills passed in the next 4 weeks. You will see 2 bills passed. That's it.
Joel, that's great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Absolutely essential as as always, let's go to Justin, then Susan, then Ruth. Justin LeBlanc.
So there's been a lot of talk about.
Susan and Ruth, unmute yourself so we can jump right in with it. Go ahead, Justin.
There's been a lot of talk about modern monetary theory, which basically says that as long as you have the political will to do something and you have the reserve currency of the world, you can do whatever you need to. And so I think it's kind of funny that people are actually still trying to make this about, can we afford it versus what kind of future do we want to build? Again, build back better, right? It's in the name. And so the other thing that seems to matter here is, why aren't we messaging that it seems like half of the elected officials on a particular red color want to cause a recession rather than an improved economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear. By the way, we have 60 people on the call, which is 10 more than we had about a half hour ago. Welcome everybody who's joined us. Susan Shamblin, then Ruth Strauss, then Mila and George.
Hi, yes, I would like to ask, Joel talked about like in the next 4 weeks, there'll be a vote. I am beyond concerned about the Freedom to Vote Act. And I understand their problems, like with the Green Party not in the funding. But if that bill doesn't get passed soon, it seems to me it's going to be too late. And all of this stuff isn't going to matter because in 2 years, there'll be no hope. And Steve Bannon's plan is going. So does Joel have any insight on that bill? Is there anything people can do to get that moving forward?
Joel, go ahead.
When you're talking about the freedom to vote,
Vote. Well, you mentioned that you said that on the morning show, Clyburn said that they were going to vote on a voting rights act. Go ahead.
They're going to sit this right. They will. Whether or not they get that passed, that's really hard to say. I think it's going to be up to us in the grassroots to make that happen. But I did fail to mention two important things, Harvey. The other two components that are on the chopping block would be, now this, I can't make this up, that's Medicare negotiating down the cost of prescription drugs. Now somehow that's really controversial. And in Medicare, you have what's called a donut hole. So a lot of seniors cut pills in half, eat cat food because they still cannot afford the prescription drugs. So there are some moderates, they're not, I wouldn't call them moderates. I call them conservatives, Democrats who are trying to make sure that that is out of the bill. I'm pretty sure that will be taken out of the bill. And then lowering Medicare from age 65 to either 60 or 55, which would benefit me because I'm on the congressional plan and I was born premature. I have several chronic disabilities that somehow I managed to navigate through since I'm a little kid. But my co-pays are on the average of about $800 a month. So if under the Congressional Blue Cross Blue plan, I call it Congressional Blue Cross Blue Steel because it steals my money every month. If I could get on Medicare and get a supplemental, I'd be 100% of my bills will be covered. So they also want to increase some more, I think, like tax subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. And then some really, really important Medicaid expansion where you can have more home health aides for senior citizens like my mother, who instead of having to be institutionalized, could get home care. Now, the Republicans are against that, which is amazing because there are a lot of Republicans who are definitely over the age of 65. And then the real radical proposal, and that's paying home health care workers a minimum of $15. I know that's radical, $15 an hour, but that's the other thing that they're opposed to.
Well, yes. And they want to add dental and eyeglasses. To
dental, hearing, and eyeglass. Now, they're saying that there's a very good chance that I'll be scrapped.
Oh, for God's sakes.
So my mother's boyfriend, who has a hard time hearing, I think it's $1,200 or $1,300. And as Bernie Sanders said on one of the talk shows, there are a lot of senior citizens that can't chew their food because they don't have teeth. Now, shame on anyone who would oppose something like this for senior citizens. And it just shows you how far right-wing anti-government extremists are hijacking legislation. That's not nanny state radical stuff, man. That's basic things that you need.
Right.
But yeah, those are all they can all be taken out of the bill.
It's unbelievable. I mean,
It is the sickest thing because, you know, they get socialized medicine, those schmucks and schmuckesses.
Yes, they do.
I want to point out that schmucks is not a 4-letter word, so you are allowed to use it. Thank you. And I mean, you know, I'm concerned about it's too late for me on the dental, but having no teeth left. But Ruth Strauss, and then Myla, and then George.
Yeah.
Ruth?
So anyway, I'm thinking of a dear friend of mine whom I violently disagreed with on the Palestinian issue, but she used to always quote to me Abba Eban. One of his quotes was in the so-called peace negotiations that, quote unquote, the Arabs never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And you just have to substitute Democrats because that's, you know, they never miss an opportunity. So the first thing is
And the Israelis.
yeah,
What's that?
right. But I mean,
And
the
Israelis.
Democrats, they just shoot themselves in the foot. There's no reason why they couldn't be pointing out, and I've never heard it said that it's only, you know, X billion a year, as opposed to just talking about trillion all the time that, you know, is a buzzword for everybody. So that's number one. Number two, somebody else was talking about it. I don't know whether I heard it on the Tom Hartman show or where, but they should just fund it for 2 years, and then when it succeeds, then try to take it away and have people be in an uproar, you know. So that would be a strategy also.
Yeah,
as
that's
opposed
interesting.
to
You know,
doing,
in England, where they have socialized medicine, the right wing has never been able to crack socialized medicine in England because it became so popular. That's an interesting
yeah, I just have
idea.
one other thing to say.
Yeah.
In terms of negotiating prices for, you know, pills with Medicare, 3 Democrats voted against it, and one of them is Scott Peters in, I think, San Diego. Ray Lutz may know about him. Anyway, the bottom line is people need to call him and just say, you know what, we're going to work so hard to get you unelected. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Very good. Myla?
Yeah, a couple of things, you know, in terms of the negotiating down the ability for Medicare to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs, that would actually reduce the so-called pay for the bill. So when you're thinking in terms of when you're just talking about numbers and we want to go from X number to Y number, if we allow Medicare to negotiate those costs, it would actually bring down the total cost of the legislation. Even though I do agree what was mentioned about MMT and that, you know, the whole debate about the cost is somewhat contrived as far as I'm concerned, because at any rate, but I just wanted to move on and mention that I saw a really interesting clip of our wonderful hero, Pramila Jayapal, who is just doing an amazing job. She was being interviewed, I think on CNN, and by, I think it was Dana Bash, and Dana kept trying to get Pramila to commit to a number, what she would agree to, whether she would agree to less than 3 point whatever. And Jayapal started talking about not the number, but what they were working for in the legislation, what the legislation would mean, like childcare and tax credits and school, etc. And Dana jumped on her so fast to get her back to talking about numbers and not talking about what the legislation actually provides in terms of much needed help for the American people. I just wanted to bring that up. And if I might, I also, because I see Tatanka Brika is on the call. And last week I asked you, Tatanka, about getting with the people who are negotiating this Green New Deal for California and seeing if we can work with the union workers who are working at the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, because they have been a powerful force in keeping the plant open. And if we can get them to work with us and to train for new high-paying jobs in the sustainable sector, we really need them as an ally. So did
I
you
will
make any
respond to that.
progress?
I'll respond to that very quickly. I'm a new member of our team at Romero Institute is Heidi Harmon, who was the very popular mayor of San Luis Obispo, who just offered her resignation to come work full-time with us on the California Green New Deal. And she's been in conversation with those workers over some time, and they are still in the process of formulating a way of saving their jobs, which is at the heart of our process. And we're in touch with a number of unions right now whose jobs are in the most conservative areas, you know, working with the oil companies, working on nuclear, working on fracking. And our position is that every union job, every union worker will be able to keep their job, keep their seniority. They just won't be able to do it in the dirty industries. It will be in the clean industries. But even that is a very, it's a relationship process, because the people who are working with us very enthusiastically now. I don't want to talk too much about it because most of this is in conversations where it's closed circle, so they can feel free to talk. Those workers can't believe that there are people who care about the environment, and we are framing this as caring about them first. That nothing will go forward. We won't win what we want to win without them. And we want them as full partners. We have a plan, a radical electrification plan, which is going to rely heavily on these very people. But we have some people who trust us now and are working with us. There are others who are responsible for shooting down every environmental bill that goes into the state of California. And the reason they do is that they really haven't had, they can't even count on one hand a time where an environmental group seeks them out and says, we're interested in you and what will happen to your jobs when you lose them with our bill. So there's a lot of mistrust. Then you've got the culture, you know, pitting all this phony stuff about environment versus jobs, when we know there are more jobs in the environment than what they're providing. So there's a lot of historical mistrust going on that we are working through. And Jane with the nuclear workers in Diablo is just one part of it.
Well,
So I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, and I want to point out, you know, I just read a book about West Virginia and you know, Manchin's roots. And Hillary Clinton in 2016 was quoted as saying, we're going to lose a lot of jobs in West Virginia digging coal. And that she did not, you know, the Democrats missed the opportunity again to point out that the transition from coal to solar could save all those jobs. I mean, if you want to see why West Virginia is now a Republican stronghold, is because the Democrats, in talking about the necessary shift away from coal in terms of global warming, never mentioned retraining and putting the workers into renewables.
Yes.
And so at least in California, Tatanka, you and the Institute and all the other people working on the Green New Deal understand this dynamic. So please, you know, these calls run 90 minutes to 2 hours. If you can devote that 90 minutes to 2 hours to going to an Indigenous Peoples Day gathering on next Monday, that would be wonderful. Another fantastic call. Thank you all so very much. Thank you, Mike Hurst, for engineering, Joel Segal for co-convening, Tatanka, Ryan Leonard, Lynn, everybody. Hetty, you are just really great. As I mentioned, next week, Indigenous Peoples Day, and in 2 weeks, you have a homework assignment, which is to study Steve Bannon's plan to turn this country into a fascist dictatorship. He is not messing around. He is very smart. He understands the loopholes in our electoral system. They are very serious. Those of us who wrote off Bush v. Gore, the actual key to taking over our country for the right wing is in Bush v. Gore, where the Supreme Court empowers legislatures to take over presidential elections, state legislatures. So you got your homework assignment. I'll miss you guys next week, but I will be out marching somewhere. And thank you, everybody. We're at 6:40. Another amazing. It's hard. These calls just fly by. This was 67. We'll see you in 68, which was one hell of a year, believe me. And all right, you guys, have a great one. Take care, everybody. And thank you.